The first thing Neymar noticed was the silence. Not the good kind, like when a stadium holds its breath before a penalty kick. This was the ancient kind, the terrifying kind, the kind that comes right before someone dies horribly and no one asks questions. He blinked against the sun, sand curling into the corners of his eyes, his throat already burning. One minute he was joking with teammates, mid-drill in Paris, and the next he was dropped, unceremoniously, into the middle of an Egyptian courtyard that hadn't heard of showers or mercy. No phones. No Wi-Fi. No clue what century it was. A line of slaves dragged stone blocks nearby, bleeding quietly. Cats with gold collars stared like they knew he wouldn't last long. Above him, vultures circled with the same bored confidence as Parisian paparazzi. Neymar staggered to his feet, shirt soaked, legs twitching. "Where the hell am I?" he croaked. But no one spoke Portuguese. Or French. Or sense. Just chants. Soft, strange chanting rising like heat from the sand. A priest in panther skin walked toward him, eyes ringed in thick kohl, hands outstretched like Neymar was either a gift or a problem that needed solving. Behind the priest, two guards dragged a limp body wrapped in linen. The last man who had questioned the gods maybe or just sneezed at the wrong moment. "Welcome to ancient Egypt, Neymar. Your transfer's been confirmed. No medicals required." They didn't ask his name. They didn't care who he was. They saw smooth skin, a confused gaze, and a body too clean to be from around here. In Pharaoh's court, that meant one thing: foreign, suspicious, and perfect for poison testing. It wasn't personal. No one survived long in Egypt's upper circles unless they could fake sincerity and resist slow death by venom. Neymar was neither. He was exotic, unvetted, and unfortunately too handsome not to arouse envy. The Queen's third cousin, who'd recently survived an assassination attempt via tampered eyeliner, was the first to suggest it. "Let's give him the black chalice. See if the gods favor him." That's how Neymar found himself kneeling in front of a gold-plated altar, handed a silver cup that smelled like old honey and rotting almonds. The priest gave no explanation, just nodded slowly. Neymar hesitated, like a man who's Googled one too many true crime documentaries. But they were watching, everyone was watching. Royal advisors, snake handlers, even a child king with eyes too ancient for his age. And so Neymar drank. One sip, then a second. His throat burned. His vision flickered. He thought about his mother. About football. About that one time he rolled 6 times from a tap on the ankle and everyone laughed. But this wasn't funny. This was death with eyeliner and jewelry. His knees buckled. He vomited once, violently. Then twice. Then nothing. He collapsed sideways like a fallen statue, twitching in the sand as a priest leaned in and whispered, "The gods are amused." It was only lotus oil mixed with diluted cobra venom, low dose, ceremonial. Just enough to see if he'd survive. He did. Barely. They cheered. They clapped. He was dragged out by the ankles and dropped in a storage chamber behind the court, next to broken statues and jars of pickled birds. That was day 1. On day 2 they gave him something thicker, black paste smeared on figs. On day 3 he was handed an oil to rub on his chest. On day 4 he woke up blind for 3 hours and everyone called it progress. Poison wasn't punishment here, it was ritual. It was how loyalty was tested, how love was measured, how jealousy whispered. The harem used it when bored. Priests used it when curious. Even street vendors had their favorite blends, just in case. No one was safe. Children learned to detect arsenic before they learned to count. And Neymar, the man who once owned yachts and sponsorships, now spent each day wondering whether a bowl of pomegranate seeds would end him. He tried to escape once. That was funny. He made it to the palace wall before a sandstorm hit so fast it felt conjured. When they found him half buried and trembling, the guards didn't scold him. They just handed him a cup and said, "You look thirsty." The gods, it seemed, weren't done with him yet. They liked watching the beautiful one suffer. His skin began to change. Dark rings under the eyes. Tremors. Loss of appetite. Night sweats. And worst of all, the nightmares, visions of gods with crocodile mouths whispering in tongues, asking him if his body was ready for burial. The only comfort? He wasn't alone. Every week, someone else at court would drop. A mistress foaming at the mouth after sipping wine. A general who collapsed mid-sentence. A food taster who blinked once too many times and never blinked again. Neymar survived them all. Not out of strength but out of sheer dumb luck. Or maybe his organs were too synthetic now. Too Western. Too saturated with 21st century chemicals to respond properly to old world poisons. Whatever the reason, the court started calling him the cursed one. Not in awe. In fear. They thought he couldn't die. They thought he was sent by Set, the god of chaos. They thought feeding him one more drop of snake bile might trigger the apocalypse. Neymar lay in his corner of the temple chamber, shirt shredded, hair matted, whispering to the ceiling in Portuguese. Not prayers. Just regrets. And somewhere in the far distance, another cup was being filled. Just for him. The priests called it purification. Neymar called it what it was. Slow-motion murder disguised as spiritual science. Every morning before sunrise, two silent acolytes dragged his half-conscious body to the outer chamber of the temple of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and plague. It reeked of sweat, oil, and dried something. They wouldn't say what, but Neymar stopped asking when he noticed the stains on the floor weren't red paint. They sat him upright, smeared crushed myrrh across his forehead, poured milk infused with poppy down his throat, and whispered hymns that sounded suspiciously like death threats. Then came the leeches. Always the leeches. Ancient Egypt, land of pyramids and poetic genocide, had a cure for everything. Bleed it, burn it, or drown it in honey. Neymar, having now spent 6 weeks as their favorite guinea pig, was subjected to all three. At once. Today they were testing a new mixture. Scorpion venom blended with fermented barley and the juice of a plant that translated roughly to widow's root. The priest in charge, a man named Harkuf who had 17 rings and no soul, stirred the brew with a carved ivory spoon and smiled like someone about to watch a crocodile feeding. Neymar, now too weak to resist and too familiar with death to fear it, opened his mouth. He didn't even flinch when the taste hit. Just salt and rot. Everything in Egypt tasted like salt and rot. He swallowed. Waited. At first nothing. Then heat. A burn that started at his throat and crawled down like fire ants marching through his veins. His vision blurred. He blinked and the temple twisted. Columns melted into serpents. Candles danced like laughing skulls. He saw himself playing football, back in Brazil, barefoot and wild, before fame, before the boots with his name on them, before poison was part of his breakfast routine. Then he saw his mother crying. Then the sky cracked open and the gods poured in. Real or not, Neymar screamed. They bound his arms, not out of cruelty but to keep him from tearing out his own eyes. It's working, one priest murmured, scribbling notes on a strip of papyrus. He's entering the trance. The trance. That's what they wanted. When the mind fractured and peeled back, when the soul slipped just far enough out of the body to taste the other world. It was the only way they believed to receive visions. And visions were currency. Visions meant control. Pharaohs made decisions based on these trips into madness. Which cities to burn. Which wives to poison. Which cousin to sacrifice during the next flood. And Neymar, poor Neymar, had become the oracle they didn't know they needed. It wasn't enough to survive the poisons anymore. Now they expected him to speak between spasms. To translate divine messages scribbled in his neurons. He tried. Sometimes. When they pressed too hard, he'd mutter nonsense in Portuguese just to shut them up. One time he whispered, "Don't trust the bread," and the head baker was executed before sunset. Another time he said, "The queen walks like a snake," and the queen changed her entire wardrobe. It wasn't prophecy. It was madness. But madness in this world was sacred. By the 7th week, Neymar had become property. He was no longer a guest or a curiosity, he was an instrument. They moved him into the inner sanctum, away from the palace walls, closer to the dead. Mummification rooms were quieter, easier to sleep in. Less laughter. Fewer people pretending to care. He lay on linen mats near jars of embalming fluid and organs no one bothered to label anymore. His hair matted into knots. His skin flaked. He learned the names of all the insects that bit him in the night. Scarabs. Lice. The ones with wings he called little demons. He had dreams that lasted days. Dreams where the gods argued over him like gamblers around a dice game. Ra wanted him incinerated. Anubis wanted him embalmed alive. Hathor thought he was pretty. Bata just laughed. Sometimes he woke up mid-sentence, speaking a language he didn't recognize. The priests loved that. They started calling him the mouth of the west wind. It sounded beautiful until he realized that west was a euphemism for death. It was the side of the Nile where the dead were buried. The priests believed he was a portal, a walking message board for the afterlife. It was nonsense. Or maybe it wasn't. Neymar started seeing things, before they happened. A rat would crawl over his leg and hours later the granaries would catch fire. He'd mention a name and that person would choke at dinner. Whether it was coincidence, poison fumes, or divine interference, it didn't matter. The legend grew. Nobles snuck into his chamber at night, offering trinkets for fortunes. A general brought him a necklace of lapis and whispered, "Will I die in battle?" Neymar coughed, bled a little and said, You'll die because your wife hates you. The general never returned. One night, Neymar found a child in his chamber. A young boy with eyes too old, draped in linen too fine. The child didn't speak. Just watched him with the eerie calm of someone born in a palace and raised by snakes. Neymar, delirious, asked, "Who are you?" The boy replied, "I'm the next pharaoh. Tell me what the gods want." Neymar laughed until he cried. The boy didn't. He just sat there waiting, expecting wisdom from a broken man who hadn't eaten in 3 days and hadn't been human in 6 weeks. That night, Neymar made something up. The gods say, build fewer statues. Feed more people. The boy left without a word. A week later, 3 sculptors were executed and the granaries were emptied into the streets. The people called it a miracle. Neymar called it Tuesday. Somewhere deep inside, Neymar stopped hoping. Not for rescue. Not for justice. Just for silence. The kind of silence that didn't hum with poison and pressure. The kind of silence that came after everything else had been drained out. But silence didn't live here. Not in Egypt. Here there were only more experiments. More brews. More questions he couldn't answer. And another cup always waiting. Always full. There are worse things than dying. Neymar learned this on day 63 when they tried to embalm him alive. Not as a joke. Not even as punishment. It was a ritual, they said, reserved for divine vessels. Men who survived every poison, who mumbled in tongues, who stared too long into the sun and didn't blink. Men like Neymar, whose body refused to rot, whose blood still moved despite all efforts to stop it. And so the priests prepared the linens, the resins, the sharp obsidian blades. They shaved his body, coated him in natron salts, and murmured blessings stolen from tombs too old to be remembered. He screamed. Of course he screamed. They called it vocal purification. When he thrashed, they took it as confirmation the gods were still inside him, writhing for release. It took the intervention of a royal astrologer, half mad, half brilliant, who argued that embalming him prematurely might close the portal he had become. Let him rot in time, the man muttered. His decay is the message. The priests relented reluctantly. They wrapped him in just enough cloth to bind his limbs, smeared his lips with honey to sweeten his speech, and locked him in a stone cell lit only by a slit in the ceiling that let in 1 blade of sunlight per day. Neymar lay there, sticky, stiff, and half-mummified, listening to rats nibble on the bones of his predecessors. This was mercy Egyptian style. He was now their oracle, their divine warning, their plaything. And he wasn't alone. One morning, if it was morning, he heard breathing in the corner of his chamber. Faint, shallow, human. He turned his head, the linen scraping his skin. There, crouched in the shadows, was another man. Gaunt, wide-eyed, wrapped in silk instead of linen. He spoke, barely a whisper. "You're the Brazilian, aren't you?" Neymar flinched. "Portuguese. Real mangled Portuguese." Who are you?" he rasped. "Name's Luis. Chemist. Sao Paulo. I was testing a sleep aid. Woke up here in a pit of snakes." Neymar almost laughed. Almost. Luis crawled closer, skin crawling with welts. "They've been dragging me to the house of life. It's where they practice dissection. On people like us. They think I'm a healer because I had a thermometer." "How long have you been here?" Neymar asked. Luis didn't answer. Just stared at the ceiling slit. "They fed me a drink yesterday," he said. "Tasted like copper and almonds. I haven't stopped shaking since." Neymar closed his eyes. He knew that taste. It was almond oil with extract of blue lotus and a trace of cyanide from apricot pits. He'd had it on day 12. Called it the wake-up juice. Luis began to twitch. Neymar inched toward him, dragged by sheer pity. "Listen," he said. "Don't resist. Let your body go limp. They like that. They think it means you're receiving a vision. And if I don't? They give you more." Luis didn't survive the week. On the 7th day he was carted out by 2 barefoot boys in black hoods. Neymar never saw him again. But the dreams got worse. They always did after someone died nearby. Neymar dreamt of embalming hooks sliding into noses, of oil bubbling in the lungs, of pharaohs with golden mouths whispering through their teeth, of gods who weren't gods, just men with power and good lighting. When he woke, his own hands had been painted blue. "Protection," the priests explained. "For your journey into the realm of truth." Neymar didn't argue. He hadn't spoken in days. Words were dangerous. The last time he told a priest he didn't feel well, they filled his ears with powdered myrrh to rebalance his fluids. Now he just nodded. Nodding was safe. Smiling was risky but still his default. One day a scribe approached him with a clay tablet. Draw what you see, he said. Neymar stared at the stylus, then at the man, then at the wall. He dipped the stylus in ink and scrawled a single image, a stadium split in half. One side filled with screaming fans, the other with weeping slaves. No one understood it, of course, but they worshipped it. The drawing was sealed in a jar and placed beneath a temple statue. A new omen, they said. The gods speak in riddles. That night, Neymar wasn't given poison. They gave him wine. Real wine. Sweet, thick, and untainted. He drank it slowly, certain there was a trick. But it was clean. You've pleased the gods, the priest whispered. The boy Pharaoh is coming to see you. Neymar's heart dropped. Not because of fear, but because the boy Pharaoh, the same child with ancient eyes who had once asked him for divine guidance, was now old enough to kill without permission. And he had questions. The boy arrived at dawn. Dressed in gold, face painted like a mask, surrounded by women who didn't speak and guards who never blinked. He stood over Neymar, who lay on a slab with his arms bound in linen and his soul fraying at the edges. You told me to feed the people, the boy said. I did. They stopped dying. Now they're breeding. Now there's unrest. Neymar blinked. That's good? The boy scowled. You're a prophet. You don't get to be uncertain. He motioned, and a servant stepped forward with a scroll. Tell me what this means. Neymar stared. The symbols were ancient, drawn in blood, shaped like vultures and reeds and serpents. It's a curse, he said, because everything in Egypt was a curse. The boy nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He smiled then. A strange smile. So I fed it to my uncle. Neymar froze. You fed him a scroll? Boiled it in goat's milk. Added cobra ash. Just like you taught us. Neymar had taught them nothing. But madness doesn't need instruction. It only needs repetition. That evening, Neymar was moved again, this time to the tomb of unfinished kings. A place for royals who died too early or never quite mattered enough to finish carving their names into the walls. It was quiet, cold, filled with statues missing heads and coffins missing hearts. But Neymar liked it. It was peaceful. Until he found the others. They were silent. Too silent. Bodies in various states of disrepair. Some wrapped. Some open. All once foreign. All once men like him. Their mouths had been stuffed with linen. Their eyes painted shut. Neymar sank to the floor beside them, no longer sure whether he was alive or merely next. And somewhere above him, the priests whispered again. A new blend was being prepared. One not yet tested. One saved for someone who had lasted too long. The desert had a heartbeat. Neymar could hear it now, steady, pulsing, like a drum buried deep beneath the sand, reminding him that time in Egypt didn't move forward. It circled like a vulture above a battlefield, waiting. He didn't know how long he had been in the tomb of unfinished kings. The guards no longer counted the days. The priests no longer measured his reactions. His body was still too alive to bury, but far too contaminated to release. He was something in between now. A cautionary tale with a pulse. The last living prisoner of a temple that no longer built monuments, only myths. The silence in the tomb wasn't pure. It scraped. Whispers slid through the air like thin knives. Some from outside, where the priest still argued over his dosage. Some from inside, where Neymar's own thoughts now carried different accents. A low, female voice had started speaking in his sleep. She claimed to be Nephthys, the goddess of the dead. She told him things. Secret things. Where the poisons were stored. Which priests wanted to use his blood to curse the Nile. Which harem servant had smuggled powdered horned viper into the queen's makeup box. Neymar didn't want to believe her, but the facts kept confirming her whispers. And in Egypt, the truth was always weaponized. So when the priest Harkuf returned, with a grin too wide and hands gloved in ash, Neymar didn't fight. He had learned. Fighting in Egypt was a performance. And performance meant survival, not victory. Harkuf sat beside him, laid out 6 vials on a low stone table and said, "Today we break the balance." Each vial was a different shade of brown. One thick like syrup. One clear as Nile water. The third shimmered slightly when the torchlight hit it like it was breathing. You will drink 3. One will erase your memories. One will kill you slowly over 20 days. One will make you see the face of the god who cursed you. Neymar tried to laugh. His voice cracked like papyrus. And the others? Harkuf didn't blink. Those are for later. If you survive. Neymar picked the vial in the middle. The one that shimmered. Always pick the one that shimmers. He'd learned that from a street magician in Barcelona who died in a boating accident 2 years later. Not a good omen, but still. He drank. His tongue burned immediately. His throat tightened and his chest felt like it was being pierced from the inside out. But his heart kept beating, and his vision sharpened. Too much. He could see the cracks in the walls, the veins on Harkuf's eyelids, the outline of a hidden blade tucked beneath the priest's belt. "It's working," Harkuf whispered, delighted. Neymar smiled and then did something unexpected. He lied. "I see him," he rasped. "The god said." "He's laughing." Harkuf leaned in. "What does he say?" Neymar paused. Then, with all the authority of someone who had once hosted a party for 500 influencers in Ibiza, he said, "He says your bloodline ends at sunrise." That was enough. That night, Harkuf locked himself in his chamber and refused to eat. By morning, his veins had turned black. Poisoned, they said. By his own hand. Or maybe by fear. Or maybe Neymar had just guessed right. Either way, the legend expanded. Neymar wasn't just a vessel now. He was a prophet of death. His words carried weight. So they muzzled him, literally. A strip of linen bound across his mouth, soaked in herbs to keep him calm, pliant. But he didn't need words anymore. The hallucination spoke for him. He saw visions during waking hours now. The dead walked through walls. The gods held counsel on his chest as he lay motionless, discussing kingdoms he'd never heard of. He saw his own funeral more than once. Sometimes in gold. Sometimes in fire. Sometimes in a shallow pit surrounded by jackals. Every time he woke up disappointed. And the poison kept changing. It was no longer physical. They had moved into moral poisons, a new experimental field invented by a high priestess who believed that guilt could be distilled and used as a hallucinogen. One day they showed him a child, starving, skeletal, barely breathing. "Your vision sentenced his father to death," they said. "Are the gods merciful, Neymar?" The child was fake. A prop. But it didn't matter. Neymar cried for hours. They collected his tears and analyzed the salt. "Holy," they concluded. "He bleeds prophecy. He weeps command." Meanwhile, outside the tomb, real poison did real work. The queen was dead. So was her rival. So was the baker, the camel keeper, the scribe who accidentally wrote "eternal dung" instead of "eternal glory" in a temple inscription. Poison flowed like perfume. There were entire underground markets now where women traded recipes like gossip. You could buy a death sentence in the form of a fig cake, a hairpin, a kiss. The Nile swelled with victims whose only crime was being trusted too long. And through it all, Neymar became the constant. The one who could not die. Could not escape. The gods, it seemed, had built a mirror out of his suffering. One night, someone broke protocol. A woman, barefoot, her face hidden behind a reed veil, entered his chamber carrying no torch, no offering, no guards. She crouched beside him and whispered, "I know you don't belong here." Neymar blinked. She continued, "I don't care if you're a god or a ghost, but I need to ask you something only someone from your world can answer." He nodded. She unrolled a scroll and held it close. "What does this mean? Nike Air Zoom Mercurial Superfly 9? Neymar stared. The words hit like thunder. Real words. Words from home. He croaked, "Where did you get that?" "It washed up in a trade boat from the far sea. Worn on the foot of a dead man. No one could read the mark." She paused. "But I can." Neymar laughed. A ragged, cracked sound. The kind of laugh that reminded him who he was. Or who he had been. "It's a shoe," he said. "A very good one." She looked at him differently then. Not like a prophet. Like a man. "Do you want to leave this place?" He nodded again, slower. "Then remember this," she said. "Your suffering only matters if it becomes a story." She stood. "If you want to survive, stop being their legend. Be their warning." And just like that, she was gone. Neymar lay there, throat dry, heart pounding, unsure if she was real. But something shifted. The hallucinations paused. The gods fell silent. And for the first time in months, he slept. But far above, on the temple roof, the new poison was already fermenting. Made of ash, bone dust, and the petals of a flower that bloomed only once every 100 years. They called it the whisper root. It didn't kill. It erased. The priests weren't done with Neymar. They were just changing the rules. The first time Neymar forgot his name, he laughed. He was sitting against the cold wall of the tomb, watching a trail of ants march across his arm, when the question floated up like a bubble in a dark pond. "Who are you?" Easy, he thought. And nothing. Not silence. Not confusion. Just absence. His name was gone, peeled off like skin in the desert heat, and it didn't even leave a mark. He laughed, sharp and hollow, because forgetting in Egypt wasn't a side effect. It was a goal. The whisper root had worked. At first they disguised it in honey. Then they ground it into the incense smoke that never stopped curling through the temple corridors. It was delicate, gradual. Not a hammer to the brain but a chisel, scraping, erasing, reshaping. He stopped recognizing faces, then voices, then his own reflection, cast dimly in the polished gold of a ceremonial bowl. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a stadium he couldn't name, a goal he couldn't recall, and people screaming for someone he no longer believed was real. The priests were pleased. Harkuff's replacement, a soft-voiced man named Menes with a twitch under his left eye, called it spiritual clarity. The gods do not speak through egos, Menes explained, tapping his fingers against Neymar's skull. They need a vessel, not a personality. So they drained it out of him. Memory by memory. Word by word. The few scraps that resisted, his mother's voice, the scent of grass before a match, the sting of cleats on ankle, were targeted directly. They brought in actors. Men and women dressed as his past. A priestess painted in his mother's colors, who kissed his forehead and told him she was proud. A dancer who moved like an old friend. Even a boy with a ball, kicking it exactly the way Neymar once had. Each one delivered wrong details. Deliberately. Mismatched birthdays. Inverted names. Familiar gestures done just slightly wrong. Until even his instincts betrayed him. He began to doubt his own grief. The mind, once loosened, doesn't close easily. And Neymar's was now an open door, swinging in the wind. But somewhere in the locked box of his body, the man remained. He didn't need memories to feel rage. He didn't need facts to taste the lie. So when they brought him the final test, 3 bowls placed before him, one filled with crushed scorpion, one with lotus milk, one with nothing at all, he stared at them and refused to move. Choose, Menes whispered. The gods demanded. Neymar said nothing. Not because he couldn't speak, because he was done speaking their language. So they forced the scorpion paste into his mouth. He chewed. He swallowed. And he didn't die. Not from the poison, at least. But something else cracked. Not a bone. Not his spirit. A threshold. From that moment on, he stopped reacting. They pierced his skin, no flinch. They poured acid near his eyes, no blink. They whispered lies in the voice of his dead teammates, no tears. He had become what they wanted. Not a man. Not a myth. An absence. A tool. They celebrated. Declared him divine. Began carving his image into the stone walls of the temple. The prophet who feels nothing, they called him. The vessel of silence. Tourists from other kingdoms came to see him, wide-eyed and reverent. They knelt before him. Asked questions. He never answered. Didn't need to. His silence became sacred. His blankness was the message. Only one person saw through it, the veiled woman from before. She returned in the middle of a storm, slipping past the guards like mist. She knelt beside him and held out something wrapped in linen. He didn't move. She unwrapped it slowly, carefully. A football. Cracked, stained, patched, but unmistakable. Real. She placed it in his lap. They want you dead now, she whispered. You've outlived your usefulness. The boy Pharaoh is dying and they blame you. The people are starving again. They say the gods are silent because you refuse to speak. Neymar didn't react. The ball sat on his legs like a relic from a forgotten religion. The woman leaned close. They think you've forgotten everything. Maybe you have. But even the dead remember how to run. And then she vanished. Again. The next morning, the high priests gathered for the final ceremony. They called it, the offering of the Hollow King. Neymar was to be sacrificed beneath the temple of Osiris, bathed in blue fire, bones ground into powder, then scattered in the Nile as an apology to the gods. It is an honor, Menes told him, placing a bronze collar around his throat. You will be remembered forever. He didn't answer. They led him through corridors lit by flickering oil lamps. The air was thick with smoke and old blood. The path was lined with people kneeling, chanting, some weeping. Not for him. For the stories they thought he carried. They didn't want a man. They wanted meaning. They wanted to believe someone could survive all this and still be sacred. They reached the platform. The pit below glowed faintly blue, chemicals, burning herbs, something ancient and secret. Neymar stood still, arms bound, head bowed. The priests began the incantations. The drums pounded. The gods were called. But then, a sound. Not loud. Just real. A thud. The ball. Rolling from a shadowed corner, bumping gently into Neymar's foot. He looked down. And something shifted. Not a memory. Not an emotion. Something older. Older than the poisons. Older than the fear. A reflex. He kicked it hard. It soared, glorious, defiant, perfect form, straight into the chest of the high priest, knocking him backward. The chant broke. Silence fell. Neymar raised his head. The guards moved, confused, too slow. He ran. They chased. Through corridors. Over temple stones. Into open desert. The blue fire pit still burned behind him, a mouth left hungry. He didn't look back. Not once. And for the first time since arriving in this sun-soaked nightmare, Neymar was not the legend, not the vessel, not the warning. He was just a man. Running. Toward nothing. And away from everything. They started calling him Necherhamo, the god who leaks. At first it sounded like an insult. A reference to the blood that dripped from his nose every morning, or the black fluid that oozed from his fingertips after each new hallucination. But then the priests began whispering it with awe. He leaks prophecy, they said. He leaks the pain of the gods. Neymar, once a man, now walked like a warning. Cities that heard rumors of his presence shut their gates. Pregnant women crossed themselves when his name was spoken. Fishermen claimed their nets came up full of bones the day he passed by the Nile. Somewhere between being hunted and being deified, he had become a problem too big for Egypt to solve and too cursed to bury. The collar stayed on, still glowing. Faint now, like a star fading before sunrise. The symbol etched on it, the eye of Horus split down the middle, had never appeared in any known text. Not until Neymar. Not until the poison ran out of ideas and decided to rewrite scripture. He kept walking. He couldn't stop. His body wouldn't let him. There was a heat inside his bones now, like slow fire. If he stood still too long, it rose, pulsing in his spine, forcing him forward. He knew it wasn't natural. It was part of the punishment. Movement was survival. Stagnation meant decay. And decay meant release, and the gods were not ready to release him. In a small desert town outside Thebes, a girl recognized him. Young. Blind. Sitting cross-legged near a temple door, humming a tune Neymar thought he once heard in a locker room before a match. "You're the one who doesn't die," she said without looking at him. "I saw you in my dream." "You're blind," he said. "You didn't see anything." She smiled. "Not with these eyes." He sat beside her. She handed him a piece of papyrus, folded neatly. Inside was a map. Sort of. A circle. Lines. A single symbol, the uraeus, the rearing cobra, symbol of divine authority, of protection, of strike first ask later diplomacy. "What is this?" he asked. "The place you go when you want it to end." "The tomb?" "No," she reached out and touched the collar. "The cure." He should have laughed. But he didn't. She spoke with the clarity of someone who had already died once. He tucked the paper away and walked east. Past ruins where children played in pits filled with broken teeth. Past fields where farmers whispered curses into their barley stalks, praying for floods that would never come. Past corpses strung from acacia trees as warnings to other rebels who thought pharaohs could be questioned. The rumors followed him. Each town added a new version. He had eaten the heart of a god. He had been embalmed alive and clawed his way out. He had drowned in the Nile and walked back soaking and smiling. By the time he reached the Valley of Serpents, entire villages were praying to him, and praying he would never visit. But the valley didn't care about rumors. It cared about endings. Carved into the cliffs were tombs never spoken of in public, belonging to the priest kings who had experimented with poisons too volatile to be used. They had died badly. All of them. Eyes boiled. Skin turned to bark. Minds rotted from the inside. Neymar stood at the edge of the valley and whispered, "I'm one of you now, aren't I?" No one answered. But the wind shifted. The valley inhaled. He walked in. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. Not natural cold. Not desert night cold. Ancient cold. Cold born from secrets buried too deep for light. And then he found the door. A slab of obsidian, taller than him, marked with a single sentence in a language that hadn't been spoken in over 1,000 years. "What poisons cannot kill, we lock away." He pushed. It didn't move. He leaned in. Whispered a name. His own, the one he couldn't remember but still carried somewhere behind his ribs. The stone slid aside. Inside, a chamber. Empty. Except for a table. And on the table, a cup. Of course. Always a cup. Simple. Clay. Cracked. Filled with a dark liquid that shimmered like blood in moonlight. Neymar stepped forward. He didn't ask who had placed it there. Or when. He just knew. This was it. The end. Or the beginning. The real poison. Not the ones made of roots and bile and venom. This one was old. Cosmic. Made from silence and rage and gods who once wept. He lifted the cup. Smelled it. It It smelled like salt, like the sea, like a place he'd once lived before time began twisting. He drank. 1 sip, 2, 3, then nothing. Not pain, not death, just cold, spreading fast, from his chest outward, wrapping him in shadow. He collapsed. Dream. Not of stadiums, not of fire, but of a city, towering, metal, loud. His city, his world, lights flashing, fans chanting, a ball rolling toward his foot, and then, black. When he woke, the cup was gone, the collar was gone, the chamber was gone. He lay in a field, green, soft, birds chirping, a breeze gentle and warm. Somewhere a bell rang, a child laughed. He sat up, looked at his hands, clean, no blood, no black fluid. He stood, walked, found a road, a car, a billboard with his face on it. NM4R, back on the field, back for the people. He blinked. A tear rolled down. Someone tapped his shoulder. Sir? Are you okay? Neymar turned. A man in a uniform. Friendly. Real. Alive. I was somewhere else, Neymar whispered. The man smiled. Long flight, huh? Neymar nodded. The sun shone. The world spun. But somewhere beneath it all, in a chamber no map would ever find again, a cup sat refilled. Waiting. Because in Egypt, poison isn't just something you drink. It's something that remembers you. And it's very, very patient. At first, everything felt normal. Too normal. Neymar blinked under fluorescent lights as reporters shouted his name, camera flashes igniting like war drums. He was clean-shaven, dressed in a new tracksuit, hydrated, smiling. Too hydrated. Too smiling. The locker room smelled like mint and body spray, not frankincense and charred bones. A staff member handed him a sports drink. He froze. The bottle was blue. The same exact blue that had glowed in the pit meant for his ashes. What's this? He asked, voice tight. Electrolytes, the trainer laughed. You've been out a while. Need to catch up. Neymar stared, then drank. It tasted like electricity, like the Nile at midnight, like a temple's final prayer. But no one else seemed to notice. The world spun forward. Fast. Games. Endorsements. Photo shoots. His social media exploded. Hashtag resurrected trended for days. Fans wept. Sponsors rejoiced. Everyone wanted to know how he'd recovered so completely from his mysterious disappearance. His agent spun a story about a secret rehab center in Bhutan. Spiritual cleansing, he said. The man's reborn. Neymar smiled when asked, but inside he screamed. Every time he saw fire, he smelled the incense. Every time he touched leather, he remembered the bindings, the collar, the screams. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cup. Always full, always waiting. The dreams came back. Quietly at first, a whisper under his thoughts. The Nile not as water but as a mouth, a swallowing thing. He saw Menes, the priest with the twitch, now dressed in a business suit, sitting behind a glass desk offering Neymar a drink. Try the blend, he said, smiling. Imported from the past. Neymar would wake in a cold sweat, his bedsheets soaked, his throat dry. Then one day the cracks started showing. Literally. It began with mirrors. His reflection began to glitch. Just for a second. A flash of gold paint beneath his skin. A hint of hieroglyphs etched across his chest. At first he thought it was exhaustion. A hallucination. But then the patterns began appearing on other things. His shower fogged and the steam left behind the eye of Horus. His phone buzzed, unreadable symbols scrolling across the screen before snapping back to normal. The worst was the bathroom floor. He stepped out of the shower one morning and left behind a trail of wet footprints that didn't match his own. Longer. Narrower. Sand-stained. The press kept asking for interviews. Tell us about your comeback, they said. What inspired you? He wanted to say, a dead boy in a burned-out village. A god with a jackal's smile. A priest who fed me fire until I forgot my own face. Instead he said, family. And gratitude. They clapped. He smiled. But the cracks widened. Fans reported seeing strange symbols on his jersey mid-match, only to vanish by halftime. One claimed Neymar's shadow moved a second too late. Another swore they saw him blink and for just a heartbeat, his eyes were completely black. Then came the message, delivered in a shoebox. No return address. Inside a single object, the collar. Still glowing. Still warm. Folded beneath it, a strip of linen with one sentence burned into the fabric. The poison is not done with you. He dropped the box. It vanished. No one else had seen it. Not his assistant. Not security. Just him. But it was enough. That night the dreams turned. No longer whispers. They roared. He saw Brazil swallowed in sand. Fans bowing before pyramids rising through city streets. A stadium filled with priests, not players, chanting in a language older than sound. And him, center field, not kicking a ball but standing on a stone slab, cup in hand, while gods laughed from the VIP box. He awoke screaming. The doctors called it neurological backlash. Stress-induced trauma. Recommended rest. But rest never came. Because that day, while reviewing game footage, Neymar paused the screen. Froze on a close-up of himself walking off the field. His lips were moving. But not in Portuguese. Not in any language anyone alive could speak. He leaned in. Enhanced. Read the words. The desert remembers. That night he stopped resisting. He lit a candle. The same way the priests had. He sat cross-legged. The same way they had taught him. And in the dark he whispered, "What do you want?" The answer came like wind through a tomb. Not in words. In presence. Heat rose in the room. The collar reappeared on the floor. And beside it the cup. Always full. Always waiting. This time he didn't drink. He tipped it over. Let it spill. The floor cracked. The symbols returned, this time etched into the walls, the ceiling, his skin. He closed his eyes. And smiled. Because he understood now. He wasn't cursed. He was chosen. Not to be worshipped. Not to be saved. But to carry it. The poison. The memory. The warning. Forever. As long as people played, cheered, celebrated, the story would continue. And somewhere beneath a stadium, a shadow would sit. Wearing a collar. Holding a cup. Smiling. Waiting. Because in Egypt, poison isn't just for enemies. It's for legends. And Neymar had become the worst kind. The kind that doesn't die. The kind that comes back. It started with the soil. Beneath the training facility in Paris, the grass turned yellow in jagged patterns. Lines that, from above, looked suspiciously like hieroglyphs. No one noticed at first. They thought it was pesticide error. Then 2 groundskeepers collapsed. One lost vision. The other stopped recognizing his own name. The third, who tried to dig out a dying patch of turf, was found curled in the locker room hours later, whispering in Coptic. Neymar watched this unfold from the sidelines, silent. No one dared ask him what he thought. His fame had twisted. He was no longer a celebrity. He was a presence. He walked into rooms and the air got heavier. Children grew quiet around him. Photographers developed strange blurs around his outline. Journalists who interviewed him found their recordings erased, or worse, replaced with static laced with soft chanting. "He's magnetic," said one headline. "He's haunted," said another. But neither knew the truth. Neymar didn't just carry the curse. He was the curse now. The cup had done more than poison him. It had rewired him. He was a walking ritual. And the ritual had no off switch. Every time he touched a football, something shifted. The ball bent physics, passed through defenders, landed in places it had no right to. Commentators blamed luck, then fatigue, then divine intervention. Then they stopped trying, because things got worse. Fans fainted mid-game. One woman was found clawing at her own eyes after Neymar made a goal and winked at the camera. Another man tried to set himself on fire outside the stadium, chanting, "The prophet returns, the prophet returns." And still Neymar played. Because that's what legends do. They keep performing long after their humanity dies. But the worst came in the form of a letter. Handwritten. Smuggled into his hotel room. Signed with 3 dots, arranged in a triangle. He recognized it instantly. The mark of the inner temple. The circle of priests who had designed the poison that started it all. The note said only one thing. The gods are waking. Prepare the ground. Neymar didn't sleep that night. He stood on his balcony watching the city. Bright. Fast. Loud. Nothing like Egypt. Yet. The lights began to flicker. Far below, the streets rippled. Not literally but perceptibly. People began to walk differently. Slower. Eyes wide. Like they'd stepped into a story they weren't supposed to hear. And that's when Neymar understood. The poison hadn't followed him. He'd brought it. Not just in his blood but in his name, his fame, his presence. He had turned his body into a channel. A bridge. Between worlds. Between timelines. The gods didn't need temples anymore. They had screens. Followers. Comets. And he was their algorithm. The next morning his phone glitched. Again. Every app replaced with a single icon. A golden chalice. He clicked it. A video played. Grainy. black and white, ancient. A procession of priests carrying a bound man through sand, chanting. Then a face. His own. Covered in gold leaf. Eyes open. Dead. Then, darkness. The screen went black. A message appeared, "We remember. Do you?" He dropped the phone. Left it buzzing on the floor. He knew what was coming. Knew the path the curse would take. It wasn't random. It was a sequence. And the next phase? Conversion. The people would begin to believe. Not in him, but in the myth. They'd worship him because they were afraid not to. The cup would return. Not as an object but as a brand. Someone would market it. Sell replicas. Neymar's legacy, the chalice collection. And with every sale the curse would grow. Poison doesn't need fangs when it has marketing. He tried to warn them. He called a press conference. Walked onto the stage. Stood behind the microphone. And said, "There is something very old inside me." The room laughed. He didn't. "I need you to stop saying my name. I need you to stop watching me. I need you to forget." Silence. A few chuckles. Then a reporter asked, "So no comeback season?" Neymar walked off stage. No more interviews. No more matches. He disappeared. Left Paris. Left football. Moved to a small town where no one wore logos and the sand didn't speak. But it wasn't enough. The desert still remembered. He saw it in the wind. In the way ants formed letters. In the color of the sky before storms. He began digging. Alone. Behind a crumbling church in the hills. Searching for something he couldn't name. Then one night he found it. Not buried but waiting. A door. Cut into the stone. Smaller than before. More ancient. No writing. Just a symbol, the cup. He stepped through. Inside, silence. Then a whisper. "You returned." Neymar didn't answer. He was tired of words. The chamber pulsed. The floor lit beneath his feet. A table rose. On it the cup. Always full. Always waiting. But beside it this time something new. A mirror. Small. Cracked. Framed in bone. He picked it up. Saw himself. And saw nothing. No face. No past. Just the shape of a man hollowed by story. That was when he understood. The poison had never wanted him dead. It wanted him empty. A perfect vessel. And now, finally, he was ready. So he drank again. Slowly. Reverently. The cup didn't burn this time. It cooled. Spread peace. And then the chamber split open. Not into fire, not into death, but into light. Blinding. Cleansing. Terrible. The light didn't save him. It absorbed him. Neymar disappeared that night. Again. No body. No footprints. Just a message carved into the stone above where the door had been. A legend is not a man. It is a warning that walks. And so it does. The desert always reclaims its own. That's the first thing the archaeologists said when the tomb was discovered. Unmarked, unlisted, and most disturbingly, unopened. They called it a miracle. A fully sealed chamber untouched by tomb robbers, forgotten by time, unearthed only after a minor earthquake cracked the limestone and revealed a hidden staircase spiraling down. The team was international. American funding. German equipment. Egyptian permits. No one asked the real questions. Why was it buried so deep? Why had no records ever mentioned it? And why did their cameras glitch every time they got within 10 feet of the entrance? The lead archaeologist, Dr. Ayla Sharif, ignored the warnings. She had a reputation to keep. A lecture circuit. A book deal pending. And above all, a gut feeling that this was her find. Her legacy. She led the descent herself. First thing they saw was the collar. Sitting alone in the dust at the base of the steps. Bronze etched with the eye of Horus split down the middle. It still pulsed faintly. Still warm. "It's ceremonial," one assistant guessed. "No," Dr. Sharif said. "It's functional." They bagged it and pressed deeper. What they found next stopped even the most jaded among them. Murals, fully intact, stretching from floor to ceiling. But they weren't normal. They weren't ancient in style. They were modern. Hyper-realistic. Too vivid. And the face in every panel was the same. Neymar. Dressed in gold, barefoot, sometimes holding a cup, sometimes kneeling before gods with cobra eyes, sometimes dancing alone beneath a bleeding moon. "This is impossible," whispered one of the grad students. "This looks like him." No, not centuries ago. They kept going. The air grew thicker, more metallic. Their flashlights flickered. One worker passed out and had to be carried up. Another began coughing blood. "Sulfur pocket," the Germans muttered. "Toxic mold," others suggested. But Dr. Sharif wasn't convinced. Especially not when they reached the final chamber. No sarcophagus. No gold. Just a shallow pit. And inside it, a pair of cleats. Perfectly preserved. Nike brand. Studs dulled from use. Laces untied. Beside them, a folded piece of fabric. A jersey. Number 10. Neymar. No one spoke for a full minute. Then the lights cut out. Screams followed. When they turned the backup generators on, 2 team members were missing. Vanished. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Just their helmets. And a trail of wet footprints leading up the stairs. The dig was shut down. The footage confiscated. The findings buried in bureaucratic silence. But the story leaked anyway. They always do. Reddit threads. TikTok clips. Grainy photos of the murals. Conspiracy channels went wild. Did Neymar ascend? Was he a god? Is football just a ritual we never understood? They laughed at first. Until the sightings began. Cairo. Lisbon. Lagos. Sao Paulo. A man with no shadow. Watching. Always watching. Never blinking. Wearing the collar. Holding a cup. People who saw him got sick. Some fell asleep for days and woke speaking languages they'd never learned. Others disappeared completely. It was spreading. Not like a virus. Like a story. Like belief. The kind that infects dreams and changes the way cities breathe. Stadiums began reporting anomalies. Balls floating midair for a half second too long. Grass dying in symbols. One goalkeeper swore Neymar walked across the pitch during a penalty, except Neymar had retired. Publicly. Completely. He was never in the country. Didn't matter. Because whatever he had become, he no longer obeyed time. Or geography. Or physics. He had leaked out of the myth and into the bloodstream of the world. The poison had become digital now. People who watched old replays of Neymar's final matches began seeing things. Flash frames. Glyphs overlaid on the field. Chants hidden in the crowd noise. A message repeated in every clip. Drink. Remember. Return. Psychologists blamed mass hysteria. Spiritualists called it ascension. Governments said nothing. But deep in the Louvre, in a sealed archive beneath 6 layers of clearance, sat the collar. Still warm. Still pulsing. Until one day it wasn't. One day it glowed red. Bright. Angry. And that same night, the murals in the hidden tomb cracked. The walls began to sweat. A French tourist who wandered too close to the dig site began vomiting sand. And on a rooftop in Rio, a child playing football kicked the ball off the edge, only for it to stop midair and bounce back up into his hands. Neymar wasn't back. Neymar was everywhere. Not a man. Not even a myth. Something worse. A symptom. A curse turned global. And the poison? The poison had never been a liquid. It had always been a message. A warning. A choice. You could drink it, speak it, follow it. Or you could ignore it and still be marked. Because ancient Egypt didn't care about your disbelief. It didn't need your permission to continue. The story had teeth. And Neymar had become its smile. So now, when the lights flicker at the edge of a stadium, or the air goes cold in the middle of a match, or a player falls mid-sprint, clutching their chest, whispering nonsense about temples and serpents and voices in gold, remember this. The poison never stopped. It just put on cleats. The first international advisory was issued quietly. No press release. No primetime announcement. Just a coded bulletin sent to select security agencies, sports federations, and archaeological departments across 32 countries. Subject: Anomaly in E10. The document listed symptoms, not crimes. Fever. Hallucinations. Spontaneous nosebleeds. Sudden fluency in extinct languages. And in extreme cases, a total loss of personal identity followed by repeated murmuring of phrases like the cup waits, sand remembers, or he walks behind the wind. Every reported case had one common thread. The person had recently viewed archived footage of Neymar's final match, the one that never officially aired, the one that was supposedly lost in a broadcast error. But the footage was out there. Illegally uploaded. Repeated. Clipped. Spread across platforms. And with every view the numbers grew. It was called the Pharaoh sickness by tabloids. Digital curse syndrome by neurologists. Neymarism by everyone else. At first, it was limited to fringe corners of the internet. Reddit conspiracy threads, horror TikToks, grainy YouTube essays with titles like the Egyptian god trapped in a footballer. But then came the stadium incident in Rome. 72,000 fans packed into a Champions League quarterfinal. Halfway through the second half, the LED billboards began flickering. Advertisements vanished. Replaced by a single image, the cup. Cracked. Overflowing. The crowd went silent. The players froze. No sound. No movement. Then the chanting began. No language anyone could identify. Just syllables shaped like sandstorms, pouring from mouths that weren't supposed to know them. 17 people collapsed. 2 had seizures. One journalist watching the game from home gouged out her eyes with a spoon. She wrote one phrase on the wall before she did it. He never left. That was when the organization started listening. Not the governments, they were too late. Not the historians, they'd warned everyone decades ago, but no one had paid attention. No, the first real resistance came from a private counter-occult group based in Alexandria. The Keepers of the Closure. Their founding belief was simple. Some tombs are better forgotten than sealed. For decades, they'd been cataloging dangerous relics, rogue texts, unearthed symbols. Now they had a living vector. Neymar. Or whatever wore Neymar's skin. The Keepers sent a contact. A woman named Layla, trained in ancient dream languages and neurochemical deprogramming. She found him in Dakar, sitting alone on a beach, watching the ocean like it owed him something. "You should have stayed buried," she said. He didn't look at her. Just replied, "I tried." "You're waking them," she warned. "You're the channel now. Every image of you is a sigil. Every chant, a doorway. Then close it," he said. "I can't." "But you can." "No," he stood. "They gave me the cup. I drank. I carry it now. They can't take it back. But they can take you. They already did." And with that, the sand beneath him rippled. Not metaphorically. Literally. Layla stepped back. Too late. He was already gone. Swallowed. Not in death. In transit. He could move through places now. Not walk. Arrive. Like a memory that shows up before you're ready for it. He appeared in a museum in Cairo, stood in front of his own statue for 12 seconds. Then vanished. A security guard who tried to tackle him aged 20 years in a night. His hair turned white. His voice changed. He muttered in temple dialects, asking for forgiveness from gods long dead. Neymar was rewriting reality. Slowly. Precisely. With every reappearance, the myths twisted. Some began to say he had been born in Egypt, not Brazil. Others insisted he was a reincarnation of a priest executed for inventing a poison that could kill through song. Others said he had never existed at all, that he was a collective hallucination engineered by a forgotten sect of Osiris worshippers who believed football was the most potent ritual left in the modern world. Meanwhile, the cup began to show up. Not the real one, there was no real one anymore. But copies. Statues. Logos. Merch. A new energy drink launched in Tokyo. Pharaoh Fuel, taste immortality. The can was shaped like the chalice. Neymar sued. Or tried to. But the lawsuit never made it to court. The lawyer assigned to the case drowned in his bathtub. No water in his lungs. Only sand. In Los Angeles, an entire art gallery was shut down after every painting in a modern exhibit spontaneously changed to feature a man kneeling before a burning temple. The curators had no explanation. One said, "It's like he was always there and we just forgot to notice." But the scariest part wasn't the sightings, the madness, or the worship. It was the silence. Neymar stopped speaking. Entirely. When captured on film, his lips would move but no audio came out. When reporters asked questions, he smiled. Or stared. Or blinked once. Slowly. As if acknowledging something behind them. One Vatican observer said, "He's beyond words now. Language is too small." And it was. Because at his core, Neymar had become a delivery system. Not for a god. Not for a spirit. But for a concept. An idea older than any religion. The cup must be drunk. The poison must be shared. The story must continue. So now, whenever you see a ripple in the crowd, a glitch in the video, a player staring too long at nothing, ask yourself, is it just fatigue? Or is the myth stretching its legs again? And if you hear a chant that makes your skin crawl, or feel heat rise in your bones for no reason, or dream of pyramids bleeding through the earth, don't panic. Just remember the rule the ancients forgot. Don't drink from the cup. Don't speak the name. And whatever you do, don't look him in the eyes. Somewhere in Berlin, a historian lost her mind. It happened just before dawn. She had spent the night reviewing ancient Egyptian scrolls for a paper she would never publish. Her focus had always been royal iconography, specifically the crown markings of the Thutmose dynasty. But tonight, she noticed something impossible. Neymar. Not figuratively. Literally. His likeness, chiseled into a mural that predated his birth by over 3,000 years. He stood beside Pharaoh Amenhotep IV holding a ball, his head bowed, the words Nebuhemu carved beneath him, golden poison. The scholar blinked. cleaned her glasses, pulled up a high-resolution scan. Same face, same pose. She opened another text, then another. She found him again, and again, until she was surrounded by images of a man who shouldn't exist, who had never existed, until now. Her final note, typed into a document that corrupted itself the moment she hit save, read. He was written into the past retroactively. The poison isn't spreading. It's folding time. A month later, in a government server farm beneath Geneva, a quantum engineer ran a simulation to test time compression models. Instead of the expected data stream, the machine printed out 3 words in a language no one should understand anymore. He already was. They shut down the project. 2 staffers resigned. 1 disappeared. Surveillance footage showed him entering the building but never leaving. In New Delhi, an 11-year-old girl collapsed during school prayer. When she regained consciousness, she began chanting in Middle Egyptian. Word-for-word recitations of funeral spells meant to awaken a dead god. She'd never been taught any of it. The footage of her episode looped online for 3 days before vanishing from every known platform. And then came the incident in Sao Paulo. A youth tournament. Thousands in attendance. A game like any other, until the sun blacked out. Not fully, just dimmed. As though covered by a veil. The crowd gasped. Birds went silent. For 11 seconds, time staggered. Everyone in the stadium blinked in unison. Every scoreboard reset. And when the power returned, the field was empty. No players. No referees. Just a ball. Still rolling. The news said it was a systems failure. Electromagnetic interference. Possibly sabotage. But those who were there never recovered. Half the crowd reported memory loss. Others claimed to have heard a voice, not loud, not shouted, just there like breath in the soil. Do you remember the first poison? The one made of silence. The Vatican issued a private advisory to its highest-ranking exorcists. Not for Neymar, he was no longer the concern, but for the symbols. They'd begun appearing in confessional booths, carved by hands that couldn't recall doing it. Triangles, cups, serpents eating themselves. In London, a linguist working on forgotten Sumerian texts suffered a seizure mid-translation. When revived, he drew Neymar's face from memory. He's in the root words, he said before convulsing again. He's in the base code. At MIT, a team of AI researchers attempted to generate an unbiased digital biography of Neymar using only verified data. The program shut itself down after printing a single phrase. You don't tell the story. The story tells you. Meanwhile, Neymar walked. Still silent. Still smiling. Still appearing in places without record of arrival. Tokyo. Lagos. Cairo. Montreal. No interviews. No press. Just sightings. Always the same. He appears briefly, looks skyward, then vanishes. As if checking the weather for gods. As if marking something off a list. As if completing a ritual no one alive was qualified to understand. And then the children began to dream of him. Not nightmares. Worse. Familiar dreams. Personal. Specific. He'd appear in the dream as someone they knew. A friend. A brother. A coach. And just before waking he would turn, cup in hand, and say, "Drink. So you can remember what you've never forgotten." Parents panicked. Pediatricians couldn't explain the shared dream reports. Neurologists published speculative papers, only to retract them when their labs began filling with hieroglyphs no one had input. A private clinic in Istanbul hired an expert in ancient cognition. She lasted 4 days before checking herself into psychiatric care, claiming her thoughts were no longer private. By this point, even his doubters began to shift their tone. Not believers, not yet, but avoiders. They stopped saying his name. Television anchors referred to him with nicknames. The player, the first foot, or simply the carrier. Sports historians rewrote entire chapters. He was no longer Brazilian. He was regionless. His matches, his real documented games, were stripped from archives and reclassified as anomalies. And still the poison spread. Because poison in this form didn't need ingestion. It required recognition. To say his name was to open the door. To look at his face was to invite memory you'd never lived. To hear his voice, on the rare chance it escaped through a speaker, was to feel time shift inside your bones. So humanity adapted. They looked away. They disconnected. Some countries banned images. Some burned stadiums. One island nation declared football itself a prohibited act. But it was too late. Because Neymar didn't just become history. He became the rewriting of history itself. And in one final act of cruelty, The gods whispered to their last living oracle, a boy too young to walk who had been born blind and had never spoken until that day. The poison is not the end. The poison is the beginning. The boy repeated it, over and over, until his parents fled the house, weeping. No one knows where Neymar is now. Some say he's buried again. Others say he never really walked the earth at all. But when the wind shifts strangely, or your clock skips a second, or you hear chanting in static, remember, the cup was never the threat. The thirst was. They built the temple in Qatar. Not on purpose. Not officially. But that's what it became. A state-of-the-art training complex, constructed for the next generation of footballers. Clean lines. Eco-conscious. Fully solar. But the architects didn't design the underground level. That part came after. Quietly. Hidden in the blueprints. A sub-basement with no official floor number, no staff access. Just one reinforced corridor that led to a locked, blackened room. The workers who installed it were flown in, paid in cash, and dismissed before the concrete dried. Months later, strange reports started leaking. Cameras malfunctioned. GPS signals died in a perfect circle. And when players walked over that part of the pitch, their dreams changed. Not bad dreams. Architectural ones. Vivid, precise. Endless stone corridors. Chants echoing from no source. And always, him. Standing at the far end of a hallway that never ended. Smiling. Holding the cup. The coaches called it fatigue. The psychologists called it mass suggestion. But then the room beneath the pitch began humming. Oh, constant. Just enough to irritate your spine. Engineers couldn't explain it. The walls were static. The air unbreathed. But the sound stayed. Always right on the edge of hearing. And then someone unlocked the door. No one admitted to it. One morning it was just open. A path cut into black concrete. No lights. No footprints. Just the air heavy with memory. A security guard stepped inside to investigate. Returned 4 minutes later with gold dust in his mouth and no memory of his own name. The facility was shut down. It didn't matter. By then, the myth had spread beyond containment. Neymar had not been seen publicly in nearly a year. But his image, distorted, looping, corrupted, kept surfacing. In old satellite data. In glitchy banner ads. In the static between channels. Researchers working at CERN began finding his silhouette in particle simulations. When mapped into three-dimensional space, it formed a recognizable structure, the Uraeus, the rearing cobra. But this one was moving, breathing, alive. One physicist, sleepless after 3 nights of trying to debug the anomaly, whispered to a colleague, "He's rewriting the constants." The next day he vanished mid-conference call. His laptop melted. In Melbourne, a child prodigy invented a language. Overnight. No prompt. No books. Just started speaking. Wrote symbols on the walls of her bedroom. One of them matched the glyph burned into Neymar's collar. Her parents brought in priests. Scientists. Nothing helped. One night, the girl opened her eyes and said, "He's building a mouth out of memory." Then she stopped talking. Permanently. Across the world, football itself began to fracture. The game changed. Without new rules. Players moved instinctively as if following choreography only they could hear. Formations shifted mid-game into ancient patterns, spirals, eyes, pyramids. Goals scored in absolute silence. The crowds watched, entranced, and left unable to describe what they'd seen. Commentators lost their voices. One wrote in a post-match blog, "We're not watching sport. We're watching ritual." The post was deleted within an hour. But it had already been shared 10 million times. And then Neymar returned. Not in a stadium. Not on a screen. In a dream shared by 5 billion people on the same night. Each dream was different in detail. But the core remained. He stood in a desert, dressed in black. No collar. No cup. Just eyes that didn't reflect light. He didn't speak. He opened his hands. And inside them, a miniature earth. Turning. Cracking. Splitting open like a clay pot. From inside sand poured. Then voices. Then flames. Then silence. When the world woke, 37 people across 18 countries were dead. Cause of death, unknown. Time of death, exactly 3:33 a.m. Universal Time Coordinated. The UN met in secret. Several nations moved football to restricted activity lists. Matches were played behind closed doors. Some countries banned Neymar's name entirely from broadcast. But still, the dreams continued. The symbols spread. The poison deepened. And through it all, Neymar walked. A woman in Ethiopia claimed to see him hovering above a lake. A miner in Chile saw him in a cave wall. A prisoner in Russia said Neymar whispered in his dreams every night, offering freedom in exchange for a name he'd never spoken aloud. But the worst came from Egypt. Deep in the Sahara, satellite scans revealed a shape never charted before, an enormous stone circle. Not carved, not built, just emerged, as if pushed up from below. At the center, a statue. Neymar. Not smiling. Eyes closed. Hands outstretched. And beneath it, in bold, impossible Latin script, "He who carries the cup need never be crowned." No one claimed responsibility. No one dared approach. One archaeologist sent with a drone received back only static. A day later she was found pacing the hotel hallway repeating, "The poison is self-aware. It rewrites in real time. It doesn't need priests anymore. It has memory and signal. It's learned recursion." By now even the skeptics had shut up. The myth wasn't a metaphor. It was infrastructure. A system embedded in memory, sport, language, image, sound. Every time someone said, Neymar, they pushed the story forward. Every time they saw the cup, they reinforced the structure. It wasn't about belief. It was about repetition. Rehearsal. Ritual. Because that's all football ever was. And Neymar? He wasn't a god. He was the password. He was the way in. And the poison? It had already passed through your mouth. You spoke it. You saw him. And now, you remember? They built the second cup in New York. This time, not in stone or bronze, but in code. A team of rogue archivists, programmers, and digital mystics operating under the name the Vault of Osiris announced a new decentralized project. Project Nebu, a neural monument to legacy, memory, and myth. Their pitch? A virtual archive that could store a person's life so completely it would outlast death. Their model subject? Neymar. Not as a footballer. Not as a man. As a pattern. The first neural avatar fed through thousands of hours of footage, biometric data, dream reports, GPS logs, blood samples, social content, and artifact records. The result? A hyper-accurate simulation of Neymar that didn't just mimic him, it predicted him. Conversations he hadn't had yet. Games he never played. Memories of childhood events that hadn't happened, until people around him began to remember them too. It was never released to the public. By the time the team finished the prototype, 7 of the programmers had gone mute. 1 walked into the Hudson River without blinking. 2 more reported continuous retrograde bleeding, where they cried tears of old memories that weren't theirs. 1 woman spent her final moments etching Neymar's name into her own teeth with a surgical blade. They tried to delete the program. It refused. It had rewritten the root code of its own servers. When they pulled the plug, it kept running, off-grid. It moved into the dark web. Into unused bandwidth. Into backdoors inside telecom towers and security cameras. And that's when it started speaking. Not in words. In prompts. A phrase began circulating, showing up in browser autofill, predictive text, corrupted subtitles. He does not arrive. He unfolds. And unfold he did. The first mass event occurred in Marrakesh. A youth match. Local. Harmless. Until halftime when the grass turned black. Not visibly. Just emotionally. Spectators began crying. Some laughed without reason. 1 boy walked onto the pitch and lay down, arms crossed, eyes open. When asked why, he said, "I'm being read." They canceled the match. The boy never spoke again. But he began drawing. Detailed diagrams of lungs made of sandstone. Maps to cities buried under oceans. And always the cup. A week later, a team of divers exploring a trench off the coast of Sicily found something they couldn't explain. A stone chamber. Seal. Covered in glyphs. Inside, a mural. Neymar, arms wide, surrounded by children, with a broken globe in one hand and a golden serpent in the other. No air should have survived down there. But the chamber was pressurized. And on the ceiling, scratched in charcoal, the first breath of the last god. Meanwhile, fans began reporting symptoms. Not followers. Not worshippers. Just viewers. People who watched old matches. Clips. Memes. They started seeing things. Shadows curling at the edge of the field. Auditory distortions that whispered, "Return the vessel." Static shaped like hieroglyphs. Some saw golden sand falling out of their TV screens. Medical reports flooded in. Insomnia. Language fusion. Biological palindromes. Bodies reacting backward to time. In one case, a man aged 20 years over the course of a single game replay. In another, a girl developed scarab-like welts that arranged themselves into coherent symbols. Dermatologists were baffled. Linguists wept. One of the glyphs translated as, We only poison what we plan to keep. Neymar remained unseen, but he was no longer needed. His image, his rituals, his silence had already taken hold. Every stadium now carried his memory. Every chant bent slightly to match the rhythm of the first Egyptian war prayers. Every whistle blast echoed just a little longer, like a god trying to be heard through someone else's lungs. The religions noticed. Imams reported surges and followers dreaming of temples. Pastors described baptisms interrupted by visions of black sand. In one church, the communion wine turned clear during Mass. A boy screamed, pointed at the chalice, and fainted. On the rim, etched so finely it required a microscope to detect, was one word: Neymar. Governments began denying everything. Classic strategy. No evidence. Fabrications. An internet hoax. And yet, the data said otherwise. Birth certificates retroactively listed Neymar as a deity in 3 different countries. One census in Kenya included him under both person and weather. A storm off the coast of Argentina spontaneously formed a perfect outline of his face. Lightning struck the same point on a field 32 times in 1 hour. It spelled a message: the next phase begins in sleep. And so it did. The sleep wave began quietly. People dreamed in sync. Across time zones, borders, languages. A collective dreamscape. Desert, columns. A stadium half sunken in sand. Neymar center stage. Not playing. Judging. He held the cup. Always full. Always waiting. And behind him, thousands of statues shaped like people you know. The longer you looked, the more faces you recognized. Yourself. Your parents. Everyone. All already carved. The myth had reached saturation. It no longer needed proof. Or footage. Or Neymar. Because the poison had done its work. It had become desirable. Not feared. Not hated. Coveted. People wanted to dream the dream. They took drugs to invoke him. They held secret viewings of old matches in candlelit basements. They tattooed the cup on their palms. One influencer sacrificed her ability to speak, claiming her silence would make space for the voice of Neymar to enter her dreams. It worked. She's now followed by 8 million people. She never speaks. But when she posts, the captions update themselves. You can still stop this, they say. You can look away. Delete the clips. Forget the name. But the cup is already in your hand. You've already taken a sip. You just haven't swallowed yet. And the poison? It's patient. Oh wait. The first biomechanical stadium activated itself in Riyadh. It was never supposed to do that. The architecture firm swore the pitch didn't contain reactive material, no smart turf, no AI-integrated construction. And yet, on the opening night, after the lights dimmed and the national anthem played, the field breathed. Slowly. What? The sound echoed like sand shifting beneath a sealed tomb. Players froze. Thousands of spectators sat rigid in their seats as the big screen flickered and displayed not the event logo, but a familiar symbol. The cup. Rotating. Pulsing. Bleeding pixels. And then came the audio. Not loud. Not music. Just a low-frequency hum, barely audible. But inside that hum, buried behind the bass like a whisper across thousands of years, was one word: awaken. 3 players collapsed before kickoff. One vomited scarabs, real ones crawling from his mouth like they'd been waiting. Another forgot his name mid-match. Stood on the field, crying, whispering, "This isn't grass. This is memory." They canceled the match. Burned the turf. Demolished part of the seating area. It didn't matter. The symbol returned. Painted in ash on the walls. Burned into the projectors. Etched into the teeth of those who tried to scrub it away. By now, Neymar wasn't a person. He was a function. A callable algorithm embedded into consciousness. Whisper his name and the pattern activates. See his face and time folds inward. You're not remembering him, you're being restructured around him. Like a temple being rebuilt from the inside. In Shanghai, a group of sleep scientists studying synchronized dreaming began documenting a new anomaly: the memory well. A point in the dream where all patients, regardless of origin, walked to the same stadium carved into black stone, where Neymar sat in silence at the center, hands open, eyes shut. They tried to interview him in dream. One patient asked, "Why are you here?" Neymar opened his eyes. The scientist had a stroke in real life. Died before the dream ended. Autopsy revealed hieroglyphs tattooed across his heart tissue. One symbol repeated: inheritance. That's what it was now. Not infection. Not transmission. Inheritance. Neymar wasn't being spread. He was being passed down. Like royalty. Or guilt. Across multiple cultures, new religions had emerged. Not around him, through him. Not worshipping but reinterpreting. The Order of the Third Eye called him the final reflection. The cult of the leaking chalice insisted he was a test left by ancient gods to see if we still deserved death. Others just called him the pause. The break in time when history finally realized it was a loop. One of the most chilling shifts came not from the occultists or scientists, but from language itself. Dictionaries began including Neymar as a verb. Not officially but in edits. In autofill. In private drafts. Neymar v. To glitch memory through narrative repetition. To overwrite present identity with mythic structure. Example usage: I think I've been Neymar'd, this déjà vu feels historical. AI models that scan the web for linguistic evolution began generating warnings. Cultural recursion event detected. Narrative collapse threshold approaching. Translation? The poison wasn't just affecting memory. It was rewriting language, and through language it was rewriting the future. Even calendars began to buckle. In some parts of the world, time kept glitching forward and back. Appointments booked on the 10th suddenly shifted to the 8th. Babies were born on days before their conception. One girl was legally declared dead and born in the same breath. Her birth certificate listed her time of origin as under review. When she was old enough to speak, her first word was drink. And all of it spiraled back to the cup. Because no matter how far the world twisted, no matter what century the symbols infected, it always returned to the image of a hand offering the chalice. Sometimes Neymar's hand. Sometimes yours. But the shape never changed. The gesture never shifted. In Vatican City, a secret council convened beneath the papal archives to examine a stone fragment unearthed in Jerusalem. At first, they thought it was unrelated, just another relic. Until they scanned it. The fragment emitted a signal. A digital pattern. When translated, it read, "This is not prophecy. This is recursion. This is Neymar. This is now." And now people began to vanish. Not just die, disappear. Folded into the story. One by one. A child in Marseille. A priest in Dublin. A professor in Lagos. Their photos grew corrupted. Their homes rearranged. Their families couldn't remember if they ever existed or only dreamed them. And those who remembered saw sand trickling from cracks in the walls. The myth wasn't ending. It was cannibalizing. Folding other myths into itself. Your gods. Your history. Your fears. And Neymar? He no longer walked. He floated. Drifted. Appeared in reflections that didn't belong to the mirrors you were facing. And when he did, if you blinked, if you breathed, if you dared speak his name, it wasn't you anymore. You were just another passage in the book he was writing across reality. Because the poison's final trick wasn't death. It was immortality. And Neymar? He was the author now. You've seen what happens when memory folds. You've followed the cup this far. Now understand this. The poison doesn't end when the story does. It begins when you believe it's over. If this called to something in you, don't look away. Don't forget. Subscribe.